Welcome, Twim Nation. This is a wrap-up podcast. I am here today. I am Tiffany Hales, one half of the Twim Sisters, and I also do the Taffy episode known as Tiffany and Friends for You. I am here with a bunch of our other Twim co-hosts today, and we are doing a year-end or a year-in review episode just to kind of hit the highlights of some of the big stories of the year, stories that we've liked, and some of those Mormons who have been behaving badly. So with me today, I have a number of people. Let's start with Kurt. Why don't you introduce yourself today?
Yeah, I'm not a typical voice you hear on This Week in Mormons. I used to guest host with Jeff, and Jeff begged and pleaded that I take over Twim once he was ready to retire. No, that's not true. But I did acquire This Week in Mormons, and mainly just out of my love for Jeff and my love for this brand, we've kept it going, and little by little, we've gathered this beautiful group of hosts that do such a great job week to week, and they're building their own. Their own group of fans out there each week. I think as I interact with different people and hear emails, of course, Matt, you always get the fun emails. I think you get that award. If we're giving out awards this year, Matt, you get the negative email. But which I sort of like. I think like
wait. I thought it was fun. I thought it was fun emails.
They are fun
/ negative. They're both.
They are fun because to me, I'm like, I'm not like disappointed. Like, listen, Matt, you got to clean up your act. I'm like, this is great, Matt. You got some spicy content to respond to. So, So I'm here. I'm technically the owner. I'm the Mark Cuban of This Week in Mormons, and I'm creating an empire of podcasts, slowly but surely. And I'll sort of be moderating the discussion today. And we are planning to release this December 30th, and we're recording 2 weeks prior to that. So if anybody dies or something hits the news between now and the end of the month, and we don't talk about it here, that's because
we didn't know.
We didn't know. Our time machine broke, and we don't know. So, but I'm sure we all had a great Christmas, and we're ready to jump into this. So that's me. We'll move on. Melissa, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, me and Matt, my twin sibling half, are here. Speaking of building fans, we're both fans of the Daniels. So I think we go ahead. We've both already said something. I think we go ahead and say, yeah, both the Daniels are here. Hello, you guys.
I'm just happy. I'm just thrilled for this time and opportunity to be with you guys. It's just awesome to meet you in person. How fun is that, right? But yeah, it's nice to be together in this session, and I've been loving to be here with you throughout these episodes, international episodes.
Yeah, it's been a great opportunity. I think it's been about 6 months since we started doing the international episodes with Danny, and also with Georgia, who joined us about 3 months ago as well with some of the episodes. And this has been a good way for me and Daniel to stay in touch as well. We have a long-standing friendship of over a decade in person, though, in Chile. And now both of us left the country. We're in different continents, and this has been a way not to reconnect. We've stayed in contact throughout. We have a musical project together. Our families are connected, but this is another dimension now that brought us together, and this has been super fun. Plus, getting to know all of you hosts of This Week in Mormons.
Awesome. And like you said, Georgia's not with us. She's been a great addition to have that strong British accent, right? And and then Ariane is not joining us as well, but we miss them both. And then, but I think the international segment, I'll call it, or that routine international episode it's really refreshing. Just that, we get sort of in our bubble here in along the Jello belt, as they say. And it's interesting to hear what stories maybe hit more prominently internationally, and those that seem like big stories to us are sort of blips on the radar to the international Latter-day Saints. So
it'll be good to do a little bit of that contrast, like some of the more local stories. How do they resonate, if they do at all, elsewhere? And I've noticed that in some of our episodes, they're very like church news heavy, because that tends to be what's kind of more of a global scale. But we do have some thoughts on the other ones, so we'll see what comes up.
Awesome. Well, maybe before we jump into specific stories, like did 2023 feel any different than any other years? Anybody have perspective on that, or what do you think? Was it just a pretty typical year? I mean, obviously we're coming out of 2020, 2021, 22, that, COVID just turned the world upside down. But does it seem like we're back on track with typical Mormon news?
It seems to me like in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and the First Presidency, there's kind of like these periods of time where there's no change. And then there's these periods of time where there's a lot of change. And it seems to me like 2023 is sort of the beginning of a period where we're going to see a lot of change in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Just people are getting older. So in that sense, 2023 seems different. I know that's not exactly what you meant, Kurt, but when I think about 2023, to me, it's sort of like, that's what I think of.
Yeah, I think each like general conference, right? It sort of has this heavier feel to it of like, oh man, like we watched, President Ballard speak, and we all sort of felt like, was this the last one? And it was, and with many of those older apostles and prophets, it's sort of like, wow, this could be it for this person, and it's heartbreaking. But and then you have a resurgence, right, of President Holland, and now he's dedicating the St. George Temple, and that's encouraging. So, any other general thoughts on
a similar note? I think it's the first year post-pandemic where we've seen many of the changes that started right before the pandemic, 2018, 2019, actually happen, or we get to see them, after lockdowns and after all of that. Like, I'm thinking of the children and youth program changes, the full 2-hour reduction from 3 to 2 hour block. Come Follow Me, who's again changing very soon in 2024, and retiring young men's presidencies and things like that. And now I feel like both members and us, we're seeing like, are these working? Are they not working as expected? And things like that. So it's felt, at least for me, on a personal level, as a year of kind of seeing the fruits of some of those things. And similarly to what Matt was saying, maybe we'll see some more course corrections or adjustments as we go into 2024 with some of those things, especially those that might not be delivering what's expected.
Any other general thoughts on 2023 and Mormon news?
Well, there's a lot of Mormons behaving badly this year. I haven't tracked that, right? I think I have to listen to Tiffany more to track that better, but it does seem like the year of the wicked Mormon.
It's very true. They have been, we always have Mormons behaving badly, but the stories that we have had this year in terms of big, huge stories of Mormons behaving badly that have gotten lots of attention, not only on the local level, but on the national level. I don't recall a year like that, between Ruby Franke, who is from 8 Passengers fame, arrested for child abuse. Then you had the Lori Vallow trial, in which she made us all look crazy, the stuff that came out with her beliefs. And, for those of us who are active, it was easy to distinguish between what her crazy beliefs are and the mainstream church. But for those who don't have maybe a very limited understanding of the church, it just wasn't a good look. So I was really happy when the Daniels said, yeah, we don't know anything about Lori Vallow. I'm like, good, maybe it's just been contained to the Mountain West.
And those are things you hope that don't get too far of a reach. Right?
Exactly. And then, of course, the never-ending saga of Ammon Bundy. So...
I think he's our mascot, right?
He is my mascot for Mormons behaving badly, because I have given him a Lifetime Achievement Award win, because he just is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
And now he's in hiding, is that right? I think they can't find him right now.
He is. I am pontificating that he's out of the state of Idaho, which is great. I love that. We ran him out. I am pontificating that he is down in Nevada hanging out at his dad's ranch. That would be my guess if I were a guessing person, but I don't know for sure. But yeah, he's in hiding. There's a $250,000 warrant out for his arrest.
Hey, that would be a lot of funding for This Week in Mormons. If we
exactly,
warrant, sure. We could come together. We'll rent a van and we'll go hunt him down. So,
Ammon, just so you know, you do not have to become a Patreon subscriber. You could just let us turn you in, and that would be sufficient for us.
Exactly.
I love the ideas. Love the ideas. All right, so we're going to talk about specific stories, but let's just do a run through of the various stories, because it's always, these year-end episodes, you think back like to January, February, you think, oh man, was that long ago? Or that just seems like yesterday, right? So we've sort of gathered a list of the top stories of each month that were mentioned on This Week in Mormons, and then we'll highlight some. So in January, you might remember the Mormon Microsoft murders that happened, and then tragically, again, these are all Mormons behaving badly. The murder-suicide, unfortunately, that took place in was it Spanish
Enoch?
Fork?
It was in Enoch, yeah, down in southern Utah. Yep.
And then
and I don't even what are the Microsoft murders? What are those?
There was, what was it, Tiffany? I think you talked about this, right? There was a Microsoft employee,
a former. Yeah, he worked for Microsoft. He was living in Florida. He and his wife divorced, and his wife hails from Shelley Gardner, who is big in Utah in the craft scene, Stampin' Up. She's Shelley Gardner's daughter. Anyway, it is alleged, because it has not been that she's not been convicted yet, that his ex-wife hired a gentleman to kill him. And he was killed. He had his kid in the car. He just dropped off the kids that he and the ex-wife shared together. He had a kid in the car that he had with his new wife. He got out to move something in the middle of the road that had been specifically placed in the road in his way, and he was shot. So, again, it goes along the line with those Mormons who are behaving badly.
Yeah. Not too directly related to Microsoft, but it makes a good alliteration, So
it does.
We got to circle them in there. And then in February we had the SEC fines that the church received. Then March, a new BYU president. I guess nothing happened in April other than General Conference. And then May, the 60-minute story hit, which was in the news feed for a while. And then the Lori Vallow was found guilty in May. The Latter-day Saint wins American Idol, and new BYU Idaho president in May. And then children's author poisons husband. Oh boy. And then in June, Elder Holland's health struggles. He was checked into a hospital, and we find out, more recently that he was definitely on death's door, and even himself thought he was on his way out. Elder Ballard, President Ballard visited him in the hospital, and I'm sure they'd be shocked to realize that President Ballard would have passed before Elder Holland. Joseph Smith papers completed in June. July, Sister Holland passes. The Sound of Freedom blockbuster hits the scene. August, the YSA conference, which I had the opportunity to speak at. It was phenomenal. I went to the concert as well. We'll talk about that a little later. And then BYU updates the honor code. And then Tiffany's favorite month was September, where she talked nonstop about anybody with the last name of Ballard. We'll visit that. Mitt Romney announces he's not going to run for re-election. President Nilsson turns 99. Elder Bednar visits Silicon Slopes. A new hymn book is announced. I don't know. I guess it's been announced, but it's like more details about the new hymn book. 3 temples dedicated on one Sunday. Then the 8 passengers abuse scandal hits. Man, September was busy. Tiffany was all sorts of Mormons behaving badly that month. And then President Nelson donates his journals in September. And October, 38 temples announced in 2023. Sister Eyring passes away. Orem Temple Open House begins. November, 36 new missions created. Elder Uchtdorf goes to D.C. President Nilsson returns to work after his injury, his fall. Elder Ballard passes. President Holland becomes President Holland of the Quorum of the 12. And then in December, Elder Karen is called to the Quorum of the 12. So there's a roundup. And Tiffany, let's bounce to you as far as let's start with what's the story of 2023 in your mind?
Well, this is going to come as a shock to no one, but it is the Tim Ballard story. I mean, you could make a movie out of the Tim Ballard story, and there was a movie that was kind of loosely based on one version of the Tim Ballard story. So this story, the reason I picked this as my number one is because there are so many layers to it, and there's so many things that tie into it. For example, you mentioned Mitt Romney not running for Senate. There was some serious talk that Tim Ballard was going to run for that Romney seat before all of this broke. And Tim Ballard had been a figure on the national scene for quite some time with his child trafficking stuff. And then, of course, the movie came out, and there was all sorts of buzz all over social media when the movie came out. And it was really interesting because, again, just the narrative that, and I can't, I have to tie all of these together because they're also interwoven. But the narrative around the movie was this was the movie Hollywood didn't want you to see. And evil Hollywood didn't want you to see this movie. And that was all you saw on social media. And I did a pretty thorough breakdown of that's really not what happened, folks. That's what they're telling you happened, but that's not really what happened. And also around that same time when the movie came out, he separates from Operation Underground Railroad, and they're very quiet about that. And it just, I have to say, he has not passed the smell test for me for a number of years. But he had such a cult-like following that you couldn't say that. If you questioned him or anything, it was like, well, you must like child sex trafficking because either you like child sex trafficking. If you question Tim Ballard, then you support child sex trafficking. There was no kind of middle ground. And then, of course, in September, his life unravels rather quickly with an article that came out in Vice. And there was so much chatter because there was a statement from the church PR department, basically Elder Ballard denouncing Tim Ballard. And was this really from the church PR department? And lots of Tim Ballard supporters did not believe that this statement came from the church PR department. And then as the story began to unravel and as women came out of the woodwork who were abused by him, his supporters all kind of peeled away, including Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck was a very close personal friend of his, and Glenn Beck spent an entire episode on his podcast kind of breaking things down and saying, hey, I believed him. And then I started investigating and had my team investigate. And now I believe these women. And now we're up to Sean Reyes, who is the Attorney General for Utah. And he has decided not to run. And he has also come out and said, hey, I believe these women. And he was a big supporter of Tim Ballard. And now Tim Ballard's facing numerous lawsuits. The thing just went on. It was almost as good as Ammon Bundy and the gift that kept on giving to me. So that was my number one story for the year. I thought it was a big deal.
Yeah. You and I, Tiffany, are the only ones that picked this as the number one story. And the reason I picked it is that it just because it reached so high up in the church, that it put Elder Ballard or President Ballard in a really tough spot. And that, the PR jumps in there. And I remember it hit the news like at the end of the week when Matt and Melissa recorded an episode, and Melissa mentioned it quickly, and it was still sort of just, coming to the surface. And I remember I emailed them and I said, I don't know if that story's real.
Right. Yeah. We got an email from you right after we recorded, and you said, I don't know if that story's real. And I kind of got a little bit scared and texted Matt and was like, can you double check your source? And he's like, no, I guarantee it's a real story. We're going to be seeing a lot more from this. And I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah. And then it just grew and grew and grew. And now from a personal standpoint, I have opportunity to speak on these. I've done a few LDS cruises. Yeah, we'll all roll our eyes. They're actually a lot of fun. Okay, so you're all invited. We're going to do a twin cruise someday. Yes. Right when that sponsor, we get that bounty money, we're gonna sponsor a cruise. So
cruise the Jordan River in Utah.
Yeah. That's right.
Thanks for the invite. I'll take the pass.
So I was one of the speakers along with Tim Ballard on this cruise, and my wife and I sat and had a 90-minute discussion with Tim Ballard, just a very friendly, talking about his experiences and whatnot. And so he told us about his relationship with Elder Ballard and how it was very positive. And he didn't do it. I didn't feel like it was inappropriate how he handled it there. It was just, casual talk, and he never felt like he couldn't talk about it. And that became a big part of the scandal, is that the church articulated that he was using Elder Ballard's name in a way that, to raise funds. And again, I didn't experience that personally, but for anybody who has sat in a presentation with Tim Ballard, like I've been to BYU presentations, whatnot, where he's talked about Operation Underground Railroad and the work they do. Like by the end of the presentation, everybody in the room feels like, why are we not quitting our job and dedicating our life to this mission? Because he was just so convincing. And of course, child trafficking is a tragedy and should not be happening. And so again, as it all comes back, I've been under that days
spell.
of that spell of Tim Ballard, right? Of being like, wow, like this guy gets it and he's doing some remarkable things. And I'm sure to some degree he was doing some great things. I don't know. It is what it is. But yeah, I think it was the top story of 2023 just because it reached so high in the Quorum of the 12. It made, we saw a different side of the PR department as far as how they function and whatnot. And so very fascinating. Any other thoughts about Tim Ballard podcast?
For me, from an international perspective, or from a personal perspective, Danny can add his other side, I guess. But very similarly, like I've known of Tim Ballard for some time, maybe 7 years or so, and I might have mentioned it in one of the episodes. I think I found out through a former sister missionary that served in my ward ages ago. She's from Latin America as well. On my Facebook feed, this OUR logo popped up that she had gone through like an online course. She was certified or something. I was like, what is this OUR thing? And I clicked through, I get into the rabbit hole, and I see this thing about this guy kind of going out there and trying to save children. And maybe I'm too cynical and too skeptical, but it didn't pass the smell test to me from day one. Maybe it's my sensitivity as an international person and kind of this kind of quick radar of detecting white saviorness on things and maybe more trust in more official institutions taking care of things like that rather than letting entrepreneurs to jump in and kind of save the world for it, which seems to be something more that resonates more in an American culture. So from day one, I was like, I'm not sure, kind of a bit of skepticism. Years pass on, and kind of that first impression gets validated in a way with the things that I saw. Only about a month before this whole thing broke, there was a video on social media going around of Tim Ballard going to Chile, of all places, going to my country, to pick up his son from his mission. I think he served in the Viña del Mar mission or one of the Santiago missions. And
they're very close to us, by the way. Yeah, they're very close to us. Yes, they're our area, basically. Yes.
And this viral video, he was like walking into the meeting house, kind of like a stint operation, into the meeting house and walking into the sacrament meeting where his son was giving his kind of farewell mission testimony or talk. And he kind of stands there, salutes him, and everybody kind of laughs. And he basically busts into sacrament meeting, and it went viral and kind of
disrupting, the whole spirit of.
Wow! So this was like the first time him and his son are reuniting.
Yeah. It was like the couple of days before he was meant to go back, and I guess he wanted to surprise his son. Who knows if it was arranged or not? But the video, of course, went viral on all of like the Spanish-speaking Mormon news type of places. And I remember seeing the comments and the division that it created. Kind of like, oh, this is so lovely, and like falling for it. And then the other half that was like, that's really inappropriate, like on so many levels, disrupting a sacrament meeting or just doing it for his own gain. The debate was salacious and it was fun. And of course, I took a side on that debate. But only like a month after that is when everything broke in September. So I had already built a little bit of an opinion on it. And actually what came out seemed pretty on brand with the view that I had acquired about it. Now, the one last thing I'm going to say about it is I don't think anybody around me here has any idea who Tim Ballard is. I'm probably the one outlier that follows kind of global church news or Mormon adjacent news. And I know, and I'm still debating internally, like, should people know more about it? Because all the things that you discussed, kind of the access that he had to very senior leadership, the way that senior leadership engaged with him, the power that he ended up harnessing as a result of those relationships, especially in high concentration areas like Utah or the Mountain West, where he really took advantage of that. And while the story remains developing, I think it's quite obvious that it's already kind of taken kind of a direction and a specific trajectory. So part of me wishes like people should know more, should be informed, and in a way voice their concern, if they have one, as to how the church as an institution and very senior church leadership engages with non-state actors, with non-kind of official actors, with these private persons, and the risk that carries. Because if this year teaches us anything, not just with this story, but many others, is that there is an inherent risk in the degree of engagement that we have with certain parties like Tim Ballard.
You know, when Melissa and I first talked about Tim Ballard, the only thing I knew about him is that he wrote some bad history books that were being sold at Deseret Book. And my only initial reaction was, I hope Deseret Book will get rid of those like crazy Washington hypothesis, Lincoln hypothesis books. I didn't know anything else about him. So I think you have to live in kind of a particular space to have known a lot about Tim Ballard. And I'm just not in that space.
Yeah.
Just to add up, I'm here in New York State, upstate New York. I haven't heard anyone talking about Tim Ballard so far.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, I'm just, adding up to that.
Well, I think overarching, and this is kind of what Daniel was getting at, is that what we've seen is a lot of cult-like following of people, right? So I feel like Chad and Lori Vallow, that was, they have a huge cult-like following. Tim Ballard, same thing. Even the Ruby Frankie, like her online presence, she has all these people who follow her because she's a trusted member of the church, and the way she parents must be good. And I think overarching, and this is kind of what Daniel was getting at, is that we really need to look at the way that we hold up people just because they're of the same faith as us. And then we get drawn into these followings. I think it's worth noting. Yeah.
That's interesting because, and maybe it's just a human thing, and you'd find it in whatever group is out there. But obviously, I'm more familiar with the group I live in, where our culture provides 15 people to look to and follow and look to for guidance and whatnot. But nonetheless, we still create these, maybe I shouldn't say
icons.
We, but individuals to create these icons that, we sort of turn into cult followers at times and just follow them and down a path that suddenly it blows up in our face or it turns sour, but maybe that's too generalized of a statement. I don't mean to be that way, but so anything else around Tim Ballard that needs to be said before we move on? So.
Stick a fork in him. He's done.
There it is. At least Tiffany's tired of talking about him, so hopefully he's done. So, hey, there's still time to submit his application for the Utah Senate race, right? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I can nominate people for the Nobel Peace Prize, but I don't think I will nominate him this year.
Safe choice.
All right, let's go to the Twim Daniels. You both had the same number one pick for the story, so let's jump into that. What's your number one story of 2023?
Elder Kieran. I mean, probably again very international perspective, but I love the fact that he's not from the U.S. right, and that shows that the church has grown, and matured enough in other places on earth, right? So you get this very interesting people called, and we've seen a lot, 70s being called from different parts of the world, and that's great. Probably I'm going to use a very poor, example, but I like this, Benetton church where there are different colors and different, people sizes, and I love that, right? Because I feel more represented to that, right? And I believe that calling someone that is not from the U.S. shows that we've got different stories and different leaders that have been prepared their whole life to be called, right? Or to be ready to be called. And I think no one in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, nor even in the First Presidency, were living a life necessarily that will prepare them to what happened. It was just their honest decisions, their honest actions, and life, and the Lord, of course, prepared them to narrow their path in such a way that they were ready to be called, and then, of course, they were enabled to serve. So I love that from Elder Kieran. I think we discussed it lengthy in our episode that, he's a convert. He has a very interesting story, which I also love and I really appreciate because as we were saying just a minute ago about icons, right? And about we naturally as humans, we always find people that is more similar to us, or we feel more relatable to, right? And in this case, Elder Kieran represents a very interesting segment of the church that are converts, right? People that joined the church when they were young. I've seen here lots of very good examples in the church community here in New York State, upstate New York. People that converted after, I don't know, Vietnam War, right? They were veterans, and they were here, and then they got word about the church because of I don't know, World Expo, or because missionaries knock on their doors, and then they were looking for the meaning of life, right? So I love that. The church is for everyone, right? No matter which history you've got. If you have, I don't know, great grandparents that were pioneers, that's great. I applaud that. But if you're a new convert, if you're a new member of the church, you're also able to serve. You're also able to provide all your experience and your personal insight about what you think of Christ, what you think of the restored gospel. So I don't know. That's my take on Elder Kieran at this point.
Yeah, for me, it's the reason I ranked it at the top, same reasons as Danny mentioned. And I'm going to use a very US-centric example for being an international host, but the Quorum of the 12 is a little bit like the Supreme Court in the US, right? It's lifetime appointments. And while this broke this year, the impact of this calling will be felt for decades to come, assuming that Elder Kieran will live a long life like most apostles. So, and another thing that I was thinking of, sorry?
He's very young. Isn't he only like 61 or so, or early 60s?
62,
yeah, 62, yeah.
It's quite young, so...
I think I got in trouble recently for saying that 60 was old, so I guess I take that back.
Well, yes, as well you should have gotten in trouble, because I heard that and I cringed.
Yeah, but I was thinking also of going back to the U.S. Supreme Court, more secular parallels to it. When there's a president in the U.S., they're the ones that name or that propose the names, and then goes through a Senate hearing and all of that. It's not the same process, but there's a potential equivalence in that it is the church president that extends that calling, right? And looking at President Nelson's appointments or callings for new apostles, all of them bring a flavor that is in a way divergent from the norm over the last 180 or 90 years of the church, with the first South American and Latin American apostle, with the first one of Asian descent, and now just like the fifth English and the first one in over 100 years, of the first convert in generations probably. And that says a lot. And I did speculate a little bit on the episode when we talked about it a week or so ago, that the fact that he was called off cycle as well shows a little bit of that urgency. And I can't help but read it as President Nelson being 99 and thinking, I need to make this call now. I can't wait. And in a way, ensuring a legacy that outlives him for, again, decades, maybe 30 more years if he lives up to being 92 years old. We're going to have Elder Kieran around with this flavor of leadership as well that is very much on the end of compassion and all of that sometimes I worry how some members interpret it, and they project some of kind of their more social or political views on that, and I hope they don't get disappointed eventually, but it's a good thing to see kind of this array of different views, but all centering Christ, and I'm really hopeful for it. I'm hoping not to be disappointed as well.
I have two questions that I wanted to ask the both of you. So one, I know a lot of people were hoping that there would be a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles who's a native Spanish speaker. And then the other question I have is having a native Spanish speaker who doesn't speak any English at all. I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, there were some general conference talks that were not in English, and they were translated to English from the native language. Do you think that it would be good or important or different maybe? Like, what would be the value of having a native Spanish speaker and or a native Spanish speaker that doesn't know English at all in church leadership?
That's a very interesting question. I think, in a way, I've made that to myself a couple of times, and it's curious. I think, inevitably, the church kind of has its own culture, right? But when it reaches different countries, then inevitably gets a bit permeated, right? And even though we've got the same meetings and then we've got the same, sacrament and these are activities and whichever organization we see, it's different from country to country, and you see those differences, and some of them are fun, some of them are kind of annoying in some cases. We try to keep it under the handbook, right? But people are people, and then you see some nuances here and there, right? And having someone that is not able to communicate, right, with the rest of the quorum would be very difficult. I mean, having a translator every time, all the time, would be a huge barrier in terms of interaction and participation. So that will be my first concern about calling someone that is not capable of fluently communicating, right? We've got an accent, right? So we get it, right? So there's no issue with that. I don't have an issue with the accent. I'm just saying that humans need the interaction, and then whether we write it or we verbally explain ourselves, there's a time and there's an opportunity to do so. So if you have a translator 24/7, right, it will build up a barrier that I think is way more complex than we might think at the first place. Even being here for me, like a year and a half here at church, I've been in the church my whole life, and still there is a slight barrier because I don't have all the words, all the expressions for things, right? So it's been a learning transition itself, right? So having said that, having someone that is fluent both in Spanish and in English. I mean, right now we've got Elder Suarez. He's fluent in Spanish, Portuguese, and English, right? So he's great, right? He's awesome. What I'm saying is that calling someone from the Spanish-speaking community, again, shows another way of understanding that the church has grown enough, right? And leadership and experiences had permeated so much in the Spanish-speaking community that there is someone that has been called by revelation, right? That there are people that are seasoned leaders, right? That have been called by God to become, the next. And I believe that will be great. But if it didn't happen today, it is because I believe in revelation. And therefore, I believe that for whatever reason, right, the prophet decided that this was the time for someone from the UK. And I welcome that. But I think that there is a barrier that it will be kind of unsurmountable. That's my personal take on it.
Yeah,
if it's just Spanish speaking.
I agree on the language bit, but what I would add is if somebody from the Spanish speaking world is called more important than the language or than the ethnicity or all of that, for me would be that is someone that led in Latin America or in a Spanish-speaking area outside of the US that kind of knows that reality from the ground up. I think that's where the real value comes, and kind of the secondary aspect of adding to the ethnic diversity and language diversity. So it's a good kind of extra, but I think what really adds value is that, and it's one of the things that I'm really happy about Elder Kieran being called, because despite him being another white male, all of it, other than that, all of the rest adds so much value, so much diversity that it's really secondary that he's not from Latin America or from the Pacific Islands, which is also one of our biggest demographics, or from Africa, which is the fastest growing, and or the Philippines, etc. But I think that will come with time. And despite many people taking President Nelson as a very kind of conservative president, I think on this particular side, he has proven to be really forward-looking and kind of future-proofing the church for its obviously more diverse future, with more diverse leadership at the top shelf, so to speak.
Awesome. Anybody else have thoughts or comments, questions about Elder Kieran being called to the Quorum of the 12? Pretty cool. We're all excited. I just appreciate, no matter where people stand, I think everybody's just really excited by this, that to have just his past conference talks, just the spirit you feel from the man. Few were surprised, I think, that when he was called.
You're right on the excitement. I think when the previous calls were Elder Renland, Stevenson, and Rasban. And I was like, oh, great, we have replacements. But we didn't really know much about them. I had to Google Elder Renland to find out, oh, he was in the 70s, which is fine. They don't have to be celebrities or anything like that. But this is unique in that he was called, and many people already were like, jubilant. They were really, really happy with it. So,
well, and so he was scheduled to give a commencement address at BYU Hawaii, and then the church put out a media. They did a video with him, what was it like to be called, and how do you feel about that? So those aspects of the call are really new, right? Where I've never heard a member of the Quorum of the 12 talk so personally and openly about the calling and how they felt about the calling right after they were called, because typically it's general conference. And so I thought that was a new and unique. I actually kind of liked that they did that.
Yeah.
I liked it too. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. The twin siblings, Matt and Melissa, you also picked the same number one story. You're colluding or something. What's happening?
We'll let Melissa go first, because she says it's the temples, right, Melissa?
Yeah. I think the reason the temples, okay, so we had a lot of temples announced this year, 38 temples announced this year. We had, I think, around a dozen at this point, temples dedicated. And we had a lot of temples moving forward as far as groundbreaking or sites dedicated. So to date, President Nelson has announced 133 temples. The reason I picked it as the main story of the year is because I think it's proof that the church is marching forward with what's really important. I think we get a lot of distractions, both in church news, but just in the world too. And I think this shows that at the end of the day, the temples are really, really important, and we're going to continue to move forward. I think they're a great missionary tool. I think the open houses are a great missionary tool, but for me, what it comes down to is covenant making. And I know for me personally, there are, with all of us, probably times where I'm I don't think I agree with that decision of the church or that policy of the church, or I'm really struggling with this concept of the church. But when I think about why do I stay and why am I committed, it's because the church gives me access to covenants. And covenants at the end of the day are what save us and what tie us to God. And so when I look at what's the most important story, I think it's the fact that people are going to have more access to the ability to make covenants, to tie them to God. And that's why I think it's the most important story.
And there's a lot of talk about what the church does or does not do with its assets. I was with a youth group recently. They're building the Smithfield Temple, and there's a trailer next to it that functions as a visitor center where youth can go and kind of hear about the construction of the temple. And so the missionaries there were telling us about the kinds of I think it's, marble, granite, something, or right. They're telling us where all the materials are coming from. They're going through all the details of construction. And I don't know a lot about construction, but as I'm listening to them describe, we get this material shipped from Portugal and we get this material shipped like this. And I just thought, these temples are outrageously expensive. And, you ask the missionaries, how much is this temple going to cost? And they're like, we don't know. That's not a number that they tell us. Each one of those temples is going to be, I would think, millions of dollars to build, right? And so the church, it's true, maybe does have a slush fund with money that could do a lot of good, but I appreciate that they're choosing to spend a lot of that money on building temples and getting temples closer to people.
Agreed. Yeah.
What I thought as well is that on the same vein of Elder Kieran and kind of the long-term impact of such decisions, these decisions are one-way doors, right? A temple is built and it's going to be there for a long time, if not forever, And that means that the topology of temples, or their proximity to people, that I see a change in the future on what the church experience will be like, because those need to be manned, they need to be run, and by being closer to people and by having more of them, we need more people serving in the temple. And while we're decreasing kind of the Sunday schedule and kind of reducing the load on weekly activities and things like that, I see that naturally much of that will be now covered by the demand that temples will create more locally. Before, maybe the areas surrounding the temple were the ones feeding most of that labor, those labor hours. But now it's going to be much more of that. I wonder what that's going to look like in the long run. And I would be dishonest to myself if I didn't share some of that more temporal concern of these are expensive buildings, not just to build, but also to run in the long term. And as the demographics and kind of the makeup of the church evolves over time, with lower birth rates and things like that, I wonder about the sustainability of it. Maybe it's a big bet that the second coming is really close, and that won't matter much. but
let's splurge before the end.
Yes. Yeah,
let's hope for it. Yeah.
Yeah, the more analytical part of me kind of flares up, and I'm like, those are expensive. But looking at it with an eye of faith and thinking of what this is going to feel at the local level, because we're going to be asked to serve in the temple much more. That's what I anticipate.
Well, and my related top story is the 36 new missions that were announced. 3 new missions just in Utah. To me, that says that there's a lot of missionary work happening in Utah, which, I lived most of my life in Utah, and we always talked about the mission field as being some other place. But when you're putting 3 new missions just in the state of Utah, that suggests there's a lot of missionary work to be done in the state of Utah. But also the 36 new missions indicates that kind of we're back from COVID. I remember when missionaries were coming home from all over the world, and there was wonder, like, will we ever be able to do missionary work like that again? And I think that this just shows, we will. I mean, it's different, but the missionary work is growing, and there's more missionaries than there were before. So that was my other big story.
Yeah. I think in a lot of these new missions, they were created a few years ago when we had the surge of the age change, right? And so I think there's another indication, along with what Matt said, that these missions will probably be around a long time. They're not just to accommodate a surge of missionaries. It's like that surge is now just consistent, and it's a great thing. So going back to the 38 temples announced, I have a theory that I've never really had a venue to share it because it's a little bit inappropriate.
All right,
but
we're ready.
That's what we do here, right? So I don't know. I may edit this out, but and first let me preface it that I believe deeply and have deep testimony of revelation, prophets, seers, or revelators. I don't think a lot of the inspiration is maybe black and white like we like to think of it. That no matter who the prophet is, he would have done this and that, and it would have been the same direction. Obviously, every prophet, just like any leader, brings their own personality, and there's doctrinal statements, Doctrine and Covenants 128, verse 9, if you really want to dig into it. But I have always felt, I just keep seeing indicators of this, that there's sort of a passive-aggressive, what would be the word? A passive-aggressive almost competition between President Nelson and President Hinckley. Where President Hinckley, early on, Elder Nelson, when he was Elder Nelson, he gave this talk about the name of the church, right? This was years ago before he was president.
Right.
And then President Hinckley came on and said, no. Like some have said that we got to use the name of the church. But, President Hinckley was much more of a PR person, marketing guy like me. I think I like the name Mormon. That's
well, he led into the I'm a Mormon campaign, right? Like he leaned into that. Yeah,
exactly. And then, and I think, some of us who've been bishops or leaders, you sort of sit there thinking, when you're not the leader, thinking, someday, if I made the leader, I'm going to do it this way, right? Which I think
I'm
is
going to get rid of scouting.
That's right. And so President Nelson sort of gets his chance, right? And so not only, President Hinckley announced a ton of temples, and he's like, hold my root beer, like, boom, like, how much was it, Melissa, that he's announced? 100 and something?
36.
136, right? And then, he triples down on the name of the church and these things. And so I get it sort of, I think we love to think that they get together and they just all agree and they all have the same agenda and whatnot. But I appreciate this dynamic leadership. I'm sort of the leadership guy. I appreciate them bring their own personality, but I do feel like, because even President Nelson it's sort of been alluded to that sometimes he makes announcements of temples, even though maybe all the ducks aren't in a row, like the
pieces aren't
Shanghai one, the Russia temple, even some
Abu Dhabi.
Yeah. And where people like the locals are like, wait a minute, like even the local leaders are like, do we even have a parcel of land? Like, what's going on here?
Heber City.
What's more dramatic than saying, I'm going to be the first prophet to announce 4 temples in one city on one day? Like, exactly. That's dramatic. Yeah.
And I love that. Like, his leadership is so inspiring to me, where he's like, I'm going to cast a vision of temple building. And whatever you think, Daniel, no matter how much it costs, we're going to do it, right? So it's like, like they're just like, we got money, right? We're good. So anyways, that's sort of, I know it's maybe not that inappropriate, but some people are like, hey, no, these President Hinckley and President Nelson were best buds and they never disagreed. But no, I think there's a little bit of this sort of competition of like, all right, I'm gonna take this up a notch, which I think is great leadership. So
well, maybe not directly related, but I was thinking about kind of that same concept of the divergence of leadership, and I believe that's something that the Lord uses to steer His church in the direction that He needs to. But also with that comes the fallibility, or not fallibility, but like the humaneness of people. But I was thinking in churches that have been around for a while, these leadership schools of thought develop, and eventually whole orders of priesthood, branch out. Like you see that in the Catholic tradition with the Jesuits and I don't know the names of the other orders, the Opus Dei, who are huge in Spain and in Chile. Very different schools of thoughts that when I think about kind of the example that you were sharing, kind of a more Hinckleyan school of thought versus Nelsonian, and in the middle you have the Monsonian kind of tradition. Eventually, give us 300 years. Will we divert into having orders of different kind of not priesthood? But of course, I don't think that's what's going to happen. But I think human nature leads us a little bit in that direction. And
when President Kieran moves the headquarters to the UK, that'll be huge. So.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but I agree. I think it's good to say it out loud, because sometimes we think it, and in our church culture, we feel hesitant to share these things, but it's completely valid. I see a little bit of that, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's any sort of enmity, but we see at the local level, why not at the global level as well? I mean, I'm
Tiffany,
convinced nobody can convince me otherwise that the discontinuance of the scouting program in the US is directly linked to waiting for President Monson to not be around anymore, because he was a big supporter and there was unanimity after that. I have no proof, but I have no doubt either.
You don't think if he lived 2 more years, just 2 more years, President Monson would have done that?
Well, I don't know. Tiffany, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was actually thinking this very same thing last night. My husband had come home from work and he was describing a problem that he had at work and how he had engineered it. And he said, that's Mormon engineering. And I thought, you can't really say that's Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints engineering. That just isn't, in the context that he was using it in. And it just made me think of the whole name thing. And I do agree with you. I think for, whatever reason, not that, because I fully believe that President Nelson was inspired, but the name thing had been probably a pet peeve of his for several years. And just like what you said, I think it's not uncommon when leaders say, when I get a chance to run the show, this is how I'm going to do it. And this is going to be my leadership style. And I'm fine with that.
Yep. Where should we go next? Is there a story on there, whether in your top 10? Obviously, we can't go through every story in everybody's top 10, or we're just talking about every story in 2023 practically. So what needs to be mentioned in this episode?
All right, now that we have talked about all of our favorite stories, let's talk about some of those Mormons behaving badly. We touched on this a little bit at the beginning of the show, but my gosh, the Mormons have been out of control this year.
That's right.
So starting with, and I know I touched on a little bit about it, Ruby Franke and the abuse case, and that is going on. And I think the latest on that is her husband has filed for divorce and he is seeking custody of the kids. And so the courts in Utah are trying to sort all of that out. But certainly when the details came out about those children being tied up and having rope burns associated with being tied up, and how the one boy was able to escape and get to the neighbor's house. I mean, it's pretty awful. And
can I ask you a question? Because I'm not as familiar with Ruby
Sure.
Franke. So there was her and a friend of hers that was like a therapist of some kind,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
so
Jody.
What's the most shocking thing about that story?
I mean, there's a couple of things that shock me about this story. First of all, the level of abuse for the kids, and there's a lot of allegations that the therapist really kind of brainwashed Ruby Frankie, and that also brainwashed the husband, because the husband was told he was a really bad father and a really bad husband, and he had not seen or had contact with the kids in over a year before the abuse came out. I do thoroughly believe that there was a lot of manipulation on the part of the therapist. But even before she got hooked up with that therapist, you go back and you look at her videos and how she was disciplining and interacting with her children. And granted, every parent has a right to parent the way they see fit. Her parenting was not without controversy even before she got hooked up with the therapist. Once she got hooked up with the therapist, they were then doing all sorts of videos, and people were following them and following their parenting and therapy style. And so to me, I think the level of abuse and damage to those kids is what really kind of tugs at my heart and hurts my heart.
Okay.
So
it's that they were pretending to be one thing, and in reality, there was something very different.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, and then you talk about Lori Vallow, and she did not testify directly at her trial. There were lots of people who testified about statements that Lori had made, and just kind of all sorts of fringe LDS theological, where she has taken a little bit of the truth and expanded it out into something that it's not. And so all sorts of crazy came out in her trial. And we're not done with that, because her husband, Chad Daybell, is set to begin his trial in April of this year. So this will be 2.0. The one interesting thing that has occurred recently on that is the judge has allowed that trial to be broadcast. So we had no broadcast footage from the Lori Vallow trial, but we will have cameras in the courtroom for Chad's trial. So it'll be interesting to see what sort of a dynamic that brings there. But certainly, again, stories of abuse of those kids, and it just always kind of baffles my mind, both with Ruby Frankie and Lori Vallow, how people go down these rabbit holes of believing these crazy things, and how do they get into that psychological spot where they are susceptible to believing all sorts of stuff that if you look at it on its face, you just go, no, that doesn't ring true to it. And so that's an element that fascinates me, is because I can't wrap my head around how that happens. So if anybody has any thoughts on how that happens, I'd be open to that, because I don't get it. Make it make sense to me.
That's something I think about a lot, because people will frequently ask me, like, why are members of the church so easily duped, and why do they believe in conspiracy theories and stuff like that? And I think, first of all, I'm not sure that members of the church are different than anybody else. But the second thought I have is, we all believe that a 14-year-old boy saw God and found some plates and translated them. And our church is the ultimate conspiracy theory in some ways, right? It's we all, as members of the church, believe something that's completely ridiculous to people who don't know, right? And we can't prove it, and we have no evidence for it. And so I always say, look, everybody has beliefs that defy evidence, physical evidence. And so I don't think that it's anything special about us, why there's these sorts of things that happen in our church.
My take on that would be that probably outside of the U.S. or in other places, the church lacks the density of members, maybe to ignite or create some of these cases, or at least to get them to be super visible. But I do think that the way we preach the gospel, and the people that resonate with it and that come, maybe there's an over-indexing and over-representation of people that might be more susceptible to things like that as well. I can think of a couple instances in my personal experience growing up in Chile, where I did see a couple brothers that kind of got carried away and creating kind of their own groups and never really evolved into something bad. But there's this potential for people to start following other people, and that might be not unique to our church, but I think that it is potentially something that happens because of the way we preach the gospel, because of the people that resonate with it, and then boom, it happens. And the more critical mass you have, like in the US, you end up with people that really end up behaving badly at scale, like the cases of Lori Vallow or Ruby Franke.
We're all used to believing things that friends and family think is a little bit crazy, right? And so
that's true.
I think another aspect, and this isn't a story that we've talked about a lot of Mormons behaving badly, but I do want to jump back to the January story of the Enoch man who shot his entire family and then himself. Michael Haight was his name. And, when that story broke, it was shocking to me. But then throughout the year, we had more things about like abuse that had been happening and the way that the church had dealt with allegations of abuse. And this Enoch family kind of felt like that to me, like abuse had been happening for a long time. But this father, Michael Haight, he was a leader in the church. He was seen as a good community member. And so by the time that he finally murdered his entire family, there were things that could have been done. There were steps that could have been taken by community, but instead, it was more looked at as like, how can we help this man? Which I'm not against. I'm not against that. But one of the final stories about this case is that Michael Haight, he worried about portraying the perfect life, right? So he has a lot of journals that have been found, and mainly his overriding feeling is that we need to have a perfect family and we need to portray a perfect family. I think that happens in a lot of these abuse cases too, right? Like, let's not say what's happening. Let's not report what's happening because we need on the surface level to appear as the perfect family. And I do think that's a culture that leads to bad things happening a lot of time, right? Like, instead of seeking for repentance or seeking to find help, we seek to cover things because we want to portray ourselves as really perfect people.
Yeah,
that's very, very dangerous. I think I saw it many times, and I still see it. Like, I mean, people just burn out by doing that because no one is perfect. I think it's an unattainable goal in any level, in any possible level. So anytime you want, to portray yourself as the perfect family, I mean, perfect kids, perfect house, it's just a strenuous, activity in itself, right? So it's just sad because that leads people to do very, very bad things. And then we've heard lots of bad Mormons this year. And probably, again, it's just by the fact that sometimes people interpret that we have to be perfect.
Right.
Well, in reality, perfection doesn't come in terms of the external things. It comes into the internal things that happen within us and within our hearts and within our minds. And then that extends into our family members. And if people see you differently, it's not because you're beautiful or you have a new car or the wonderful house. It's just because you're different within, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge of members of the church. So once we understand that the inside is more important than the appearances, then probably we're going to reach some very interesting, worship levels in many aspects.
We have a lot of fun, obviously, on This Week in Mormons with the concept or the segment of Mormons behaving badly. But I appreciate this discussion of that, just being reflective on, we have such an opportunity as a community, as a religious community, the way that we're structured, our wards, our communities, and to never assume like people are doing okay, or we get so much in our silos of, the kids' soccer tournament, the things going on in our families, that you show up to church and you really haven't interacted with anybody. And now with 2 Hour Church, you really don't interact with them at church. And so that's one thing that I pound this drum a lot, on leading saints and whatnot. And one thing I'm trying to do in my own life and my own ward is creating that community aspect, so that if there is abuse going on, or there's that moment that maybe that friendship's developed, that finally, that sister opens up to another sister about it. And pretty much all of us have probably served in callings where we get a more real perspective into the lives of families. And you think, whoa, like that, this is not the Leahona cover picture perfect family that walks into sacrament meeting on Sunday. There's a lot going on, and so, it's fun to talk about Mormons behaving badly, but I think this is a good invitation to the the This Week in Mormon audience to really lean in and reach out to people, create a community, and be real at church, and talk about problems, and maybe we can shrink our list of future Mormons behaving badly. So,
Yeah.
Totally.
That's our New Year's resolution for next year. All listeners, let's narrow the list.
less material for Mormons behaving badly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want
Otherwise we'll be
Tiffany
talking
board
about
on
you.
each episode that she's on. She's like, well, I guess talking about another temple open house. But so, Tiffany, anything else around Mormons behaving badly for the year of 2023?
No, I think we've beaten this horse to death as well. So
All right.
Can I add a bonus track to that before we move on very quickly?
Yeah.
Because this one hits home a little bit. And it's the early, I think it was in February that the news broke of the SEC in the US.
Oh, yes. Because I do believe I said when I recorded, I gave the church Mormons behaving badly for the SEC fine. So I agree with you, Daniel. We need to go there. You're right.
Yeah, I remember there, and we don't need to discuss it much because I think it was well covered. But I was looking at the rankings that each of us gave to the news, and that was one of the top two when you weighed all of the averages.
Yeah.
And why does it hit home? Like, I'm currently serving as a bishop here in our ward, and of course I'm not going to divulge anything that is private, but I will say this, that this is a topic that comes up in conversation with members, and that it has created, I think out of all of the news that are kind of more US centric, this is probably the one that has permeated beyond the US, especially with members that are a bit more kind of news aware. And I think that for good reason. And I'm just going to say that it doesn't make it any easier to serve as a bishop when things like this happen, because we need to somehow, the responsibility to explain these things out, it's outsourced to us, and we're not necessarily equipped with all of what's needed to do it in the best way possible. But I do appreciate, though, that it has at least trigger conversations that are really honest and really raw with people. And I'm not talking about my experience as a bishop. I'm talking kind of beyond that, as a global church community. First, to fully once and for all acknowledge that the church is an organization that, just like any other organization, is fallible, and that inspiration doesn't equal infallibility. And that is so difficult to drive home and to really understand really what it looks like, and it hurts when things like this happen. But I'm glad that it did happen in that sense, that at least it's something that we can refer back to and say, you know what, we do make mistakes, and here's one. And it's quite clear, and there's no double readings to this. And how do we move on from here? I think can lead us to a much healthier place as a church community with non-capital C, and hopefully as well as a capital C church. As the massive institution that we are as well.
Very good, very good. All right, any other stories that we need to hit?
Well, I just want to. I was going to say, I just want to share my favorite story of the year, if I can share my favorite story of the year.
Let's do it.
Okay, so I discussed this just within the last month or so when I recorded, and this ties into the giving machines. And there was a story that Deseret News did, and they did a follow-up. So in 2019, they gave 270 chickens to 90 women, I believe, in Africa. So each woman got 3 chickens, baby chickens. And so these were women who they'd never owned anything in their life. It was always their husband who owned stuff. And so all of a sudden they have these chickens. And so then the pandemic hit, so the church couldn't really follow up. So I believe it was around 2021 that the church went back for a follow-up just to see, what was going on with the chickens. And they discovered that these 270 chickens had multiplied and replenished the earth to turn into 5,000 chickens. And with those 5,000 chickens, those women had become really wealthy in their villages. First of all, they were able to use the eggs to send their daughters to school. The money that they made from selling the eggs, they could send their daughters to school, which was huge because those daughters otherwise would not have had the opportunity to go to school. They became really well respected in their villages. They were able to buy other animals as well. And then the church contracted with them to say, hey, will you produce 7,000 baby chicks for us for the next go round of Light the World that we can then give to other women? And so they ended up with, I think, $30,000 from these 7,000 baby chicks that they produced for the church. And it really just magnified to me kind of the ripple effect, that you throw a rock in the water and you see a small ripple and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And how just those chickens were not very expensive for the people who donated the money for those chickens, and all of the good that those chickens did and how those chickens changed the lives of the women who received them. And that was just absolutely my favorite story of the year, to show how just the little things that we do have a ripple effect and have a big impact in the lives of others. And I think that's awesome.
Love it. Let's continue this trend of let's each maybe mention a feel-good story that you appreciated from 2023 as we wrap up here.
I like that.
Who wants to go next?
Well, Kurt, I wanted to hear your story from the YSA conference.
Okay. Like as far as my participation there?
Yeah, you just teased at the beginning of the episode that you were going to tell us more, and I've been waiting this whole time.
Well, I guess not that I have like juicy details or anything. So backstage, Elder Bednar approached me and he said, "You better stop this Week in Mormon podcast." No, I'm just kidding. I've never met any of the Quorum of the 12 on that platform. But so yeah, I had the opportunity, to walk around the YSA conference, which was held in Salt Lake City. As a 41-year-old hip, dad, I walked around there, and it was just inspiring to see that venue packed. I was invited to be one of the speakers in one of the many sessions they had. They just lined up a bunch of speakers, and I had I think a 30-minute time slot along with others to talk to that audience. And so that was, I jumped to that opportunity. They also got me tickets to the concert that was held in the Delta Center. And if I was a better hip dad, I would remember the singer, obviously.
Was it One Republic?
One Republic. And then Jordan, two Jordans.
Michael Jordan?
Did you have Jordan Sparks? Was it Jordan Sparks?
Jordan Sparks. And Jordan, I forget his name, but phenomenal speakers. And the moment when Jordan, I want to say Smith. Anyways, so the moment that Jordan broke out in "I'm Trying to Be Like Jesus," and that whole arena sang along with him, it was like, I mean, the clouds could have split, Jesus could have returned, and I would not have been surprised. It was such a powerful moment.
Wow.
When that happened. And then, so I just loved to see the church. I mean, you think about, One Republic being invited by the church to come sing in that venue. It's sort of like, sitting there thinking, this is cool because the church is doing something different, and they're trying something, and they don't necessarily have control over things. And there was some awkward moments where the lead singer of One Republic said some things where I'm like, I don't think you understand the audience you're speaking to, but okay. They'd sort of make mention of like, oh yeah, like I grew up in the church. Yep. That's it. Okay, moving on. I'm like, so you're like, do you still believe in Jesus now? Or like, what's going on here? Anyways, but just a fun experience. So yeah, that'll be my feel good story of 2023, being a part of that and witnessing it. And I hope many more efforts on the YSA front. Many people don't know, I actually consulted directly with the church to create a YSA focused leadership podcast that there's six episodes out, and so I'm not on that podcast, but I'm behind the scenes. It's my equipment that they're using. So just cool to see the church recognizing the attention maybe that demographic needs, and they want to make a place for them, and because many are losing faith during that phase of life. So
yeah. I think that leads to my feel-good story, Kurt.
Let's hear it, Melissa.
Well, I have two. The first one is that Mitt Romney announces he won't run for re-election.
I was going to joke about that too, Melissa. Me and you, we're together.
You feel good?
I felt so good when
story.
I got not a Romney fan here. I think Melissa, we're in the same camp. So
well,
to run again.
I'm going to say no. Mormons behaving badly. Mitt Romney not running because I wanted him to run again.
He sell off into the sunset. Anyways.
Yeah.
so confused,
I actually picked for my feel-good story the Latter-day Saint, Tongi, who won American Idol. Not that I think American Idol is the most relevant thing in the world. I mean, I do think winning it is hard. And I did happen to watch a few episodes this season of Tongi, and he really just had the sweetest nature about him. Like, he was just such a sincere, this kindness emanated from him when he sang. But I think what he represents for me is his whole generation. And you kind of saw this with the YSA conference. Here's this young man who's trying to find a way to be relevant in the world, and he's doing it by sharing his talent. And I just think for me throughout this year, and maybe it's because I had the opportunity to get called to serve in a young single adult ward, but I'm just looking at this generation of people. My kids are this generation, and I'm seeing them that they are living the gospel differently. They are doing really good things, and they're using their talents to spread the gospel. So instead of using their words to spread the gospel, they're really finding what they're good at and sharing it with the world. And I don't know if it's because they're more of an internet generation that they're able to do that. But I see that as a really, really positive thing. The other thing I see in this generation is they've changed the language around the church in general. So I hear a lot more of instead of God, I hear heavenly parents. I hear that much more in common talk among this generation, and instead of the talk about being so good and doing everything right, I hear a lot more talk about grace. I hear a lot more talk about acceptance. I hear a lot more inclusion. And so to me, when I look and see, what's going right and what's going good in the church and in the world, it's the way that this new generation is living their lives and sharing the gospel. And I think that's awesome.
My feel-good story is so narrow, but it's Lloyd Newell was called as a mission president. So Lloyd Newell has been the voice of music in the spoken word for probably 30 years, maybe more than that. And before that, he was the voice of pretty much everything I ever heard that came from the church. But he's just such a kind person. So Melissa mentioned this before. Our mom works with the Tabernacle Choir. And I would say maybe 18 years ago, he met my son, who at the time was just a young, a primary age kid. And I'm not joking. Every time he sees my mom, he asks about my son and how he's doing. And he's taught teachings of the living prophets at BYU for a while. And so I just think there are not a lot of people in the church who are visible and serving in the church. He's been visible and in the church and dedicated to the church for a really long time. I think he'll probably be a very kind mission president, a very nice person. So congrats, Lloyd Newell, on your release from the one and call to the other.
That's right. Hope he gets a posh location like Hawaii or something, because he deserves it. He's had a long-term calling there. So
he could serve in Cancun.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have three, but really quick ones. So the first one is somewhat feel good for this reason. The UK safeguarding standards changing middle of the year, introducing what's called a DBS check, kind of like a background check, and a number of other adjustments, including a state calling of a safeguarding specialist and a number of other things, which more than the policy, the feel good story. Why is it a feel good story to me? Is that all of that came in association with groups here of members and former members that were engaging in activism to create change around this topic. And the way that the area, Europe North area, I believe it would have been, it got split about a year ago, but the way that the Europe area or the Europe North area engaged with this, to me, it was remarkable in its fruits, because rather than responding in a way that was taking it as antagonistic or something like that, they ended up taking the feedback and introducing change. And while the approach that this organization that was driving for this was legit activism, like as a bishop, I did get a letter on the chapel, saying all sorts of things like this needs to change, etc. But then the church implemented this, says a lot of good things to me that we can engage with activism in a healthy way, and everybody wins. At the end of the day, it's a bit in contrast with what I've seen in the news lately. We haven't talked about it today, about the area of the church in California with the whole thing about women sitting in the stand. during sacrament meetings and things like that, where the opposite approach seems to have been taken. And we're seeing kind of the fallout from that. But why does it feel good? It's because I believe that we can be a bit more active as members to engage with our leaders, even at the area level, to drive positive change. And that makes me feel good. The other two, really quickly, Elder Holland, he's getting better. He's the president of the Quorum of the 12. It seems like he's having a second chance after being very close to dying. He said it. So will this be his last dance, or for how long we're going to have him? We don't know, but that makes me feel good because he's great. And finally, the TWIM host gender makeup. I think this is much more reflective of the real church. I was quantifying, we have 4 female hosts, Tiffany, Ariane, Melissa, and Georgia now, who recently joined us. And then we have the 2 Daniels and Matt. And I think, Kurt, you as well as kind of like the CEO of things, but
the grand poobah.
The mafia boss or the Lord of this week. I don't know. We'll work on that.
We'll come up with.
I call you the grand poobah.
Supreme leader. Okay, but that's great.
Speaking
I'm
of
more
cults.
reflective of the real church. That's it for me.
It's a very nerdy, good, feeling good kind of article, but Joseph Smith's papers are something that I've been reflecting on. And basically because it's such a huge endeavor to do research, and I'm here just because of it. I'm just getting the skills and everything in a program, getting a PhD here. And I've mentioned this before. And that's the whole reason why I put like an atomic bomb in my family structure, and then we came here and left everything behind for some years. And we're going back home, of course. But the thing is that I'm passionate about research, and I think it's just wonderful that the church has put all of this effort and energy and, of course, resources to get these papers done. And it's been done I would say, in a very short period of time. And it's been done by someone that is not a member of the church, which provides more, authenticity and of course, following, standards that are, accepted by the research community. And in a world where there's lots of post-truth and lots of, division and differences of opinion, collecting all this data and all this like firsthand information and making these volumes to see the light is just, I don't know, a huge endeavor. And I applaud that again, because I love the fact that the church understands that we're spiritual, of course, beings and we believe, but there are also some factual elements that need to be collected and need to be presented in a way that is organized for the wider audience to access them and to see what's there, right? I mean, we're not hiding anything. This is the way things happened, and there are, personal experiences, but this is all the collective, experience that we've been accumulating and, completing in volumes in such a way that we all can, understand better and I would say relate a little bit more on the human, experience of first church leaders and how, if it's difficult now, let's imagine 200 years ago when there was nothing, right? They had to do everything from scratch. So definitely it's
Good point.
It's I applaud, all the effort and all the people involved in the project and seeing fruition in so, I would say little time compared to many other, people doing research in those spaces.
It's nice for me because I grew up hearing people tell me things that Joseph Smith had said. And so now I just have a little list and I just go to the Joseph Smith papers and I search for that thing and I say, oh, that's what that was.
Or
it's
actually,
really
he
nice.
didn't say that, right?
That's right. Mostly it's like, oh, he didn't say there would be a rainbow there would be no rainbow in the year before the second coming. Oh, okay. That's nice to know. I'm looking forward to the Brigham Young papers. Any chance we get all the Brigham Young papers?
That'll be right.
That would be probably a very long endeavor. Yeah. Wait, double, triple time probably. Yes. That's for sure.
That'll be a project for the millennium.
That's right. Cool. All right. Do we get to everybody's story, the heartfelt story of the year? Awesome. Okay. I want you to start thinking of where everybody's going to make one prediction as we close out here. One prediction of 2024, and the crazier the better. I'm looking at you, Matt. So
the apocalypse. Do I get to choose the date?
There will be no
Jesus comes
rainbow.
again?
There will be no rainbow in 2024. So, because science will somehow stop working. I don't know.
I've been like calculating on my own, like when Jesus is going to come again. And I think I figured it out. Is this the time to share that with
This is the time. We're ready.
Nice. All right. Who wants to go first? And if you need to take a minute to think.
I'll go first.
Okay.
My prediction is that Elder Uchtdorf will be the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles by the end of 2024.
Wow.
Now, there
What has
are
to
several
happen for
people
that to
dying,
happen?
so that's sort of a morbid
Yeah, how many people
prediction,
have to
but-
die for that to happen?
So it would have to be, so to be acting president, you only need Oakes
Really just-
to die or Nelson to
or
die.
Elder Holland, yeah.
Yeah.
President Holland.
But to be president, then Elder Eyring would have to die too for him to be the not acting president. But that's my bold prediction.
I love your
Uchtdorf-
prediction of both death and destruction.
I think President Eyring is actually, isn't he lower in the Quorum of the 12? I think he's lower.
I think it goes Holland,
Holland,
Eyring,
Eyring,
Uchtdorf.
Uchtdorf.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I get what you're saying. So if Elder Uchtdorf to serve there, he would have to pass away, right?
Or be president of the church. Yeah.
And of course, we pray for their health to the.
That's
most
right. That's right. It's just a
extreme.
prediction. Look,
Giving us
Wait, let's
ourselves
disappoint
permission.
Matt. Okay.
Yeah.
it's not a plan that I put into place.
My goodness. Oh, this turned on me. All right. Who wants to go next?
I'll go with mine. It's a conditional prediction, and it is that if President Nelson makes it to be 100 and beyond, so if he lives throughout 2024, that we will not see any major changes. I feel like he's already kind of on holding pattern, kind of all of the major things that he's felt that need to be changed. The major ones at least have happened. Even the change being introduced now with Come Follow Me being a single experience across all ages and groups, but it's conditional on him staying alive for that period, because I do think that once there's a change, we might see some other quite meaningful changes. And that would be my secondary prediction, which is if something happens, the first thing that I think will eventually change is some sort of return of young men's presidencies. And maybe
Okay.
I'm biased and projecting on
bishop.
that, but I think, I think that would be
How ironic
a
that a bishop is
welcome
saying
change. Yeah, exactly. So it's been great. I love working with the youth. And I think I would love it even more if we had that extra support that we used to have until 2018.
Yeah. Okay, I have
It's not a
crazy...
prediction that it's not a prediction that the name of the church will go back to Mormon again. That wasn't your.
No. Since Kurt wanted the crazier the better, I've got one that's out there, okay?
All right.
My prediction for 2024 is that we will see the end of release time seminary for
What?
high school students. And
Love it.
we
Wow.
will go to either seminary that's only before, like early morning seminary or online seminary. But along with that, we will see the increase of mission prep classes and mission prep experiences in our wards. It's just a prediction. I
How do
think
we
it's
get
based
Melissa on
on
a general
absolutely
board here?
nothing.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's a prediction.
it.
I also predict that our two Daniels, their rock band, will get back together and achieve international success with their release of the newly renovated TWIM introduction song.
Yeah, we can work on
Yes.
that.
That would be great.
That sounds about right. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
I like
So
that.
one's a good prediction, one not so good.
I think Melissa is confusing prediction with manifesting something to the universe.
Okay.
I think mine is very local, but at the same time, I think it's worth mentioning. And we're going to have a temple here in upstate New York.
Oh,
I think I've mentioned this before.
Like
We've got a
Palmyra?
temple in Palmyra is 3 hours and a half from here,
Oh, wow.
so it's not close.
So in the
And
other
then the
upstate
close, yes,
Buffalo?
then the closest. No, the closest for us is Connecticut, and that is 2 hours and a half. And then the other closest is New York City, which is 3 hours and a half too. So
where,
my local
so
prediction-
Are you like Utica, like Binghamton?
I'm in Albany.
Oh, okay. So a temple in Albany.
Yes.
Ah.
I mean, we actually have Saratoga Springs here in very close. Is one of the
wow.
wards of the stake.
So, how
So
about
if you hear Saratoga Springs, New York, probably it's because my prediction came to reality. So let's hope for it. Yes,
Love it.
because last time that name was mentioned, all the people here in the state were woo! Finally, we have a temple, but it was
And then it was
Saratoga
in
Springs,
Utah.
Utah. Yes. So let's see.
Awesome. Tiffany, you want to go?
I will go. I will make an outlandish one. We are headed into a presidential election year that promises to have all sorts of. It will be rocking and rolling. Let's just say it that way. And I think it will cause further divides within the church because I think there are a lot of people who equate religion and politics as the same thing. And I think it will then subsequently force the church to take maybe a more stronger stand on things that we wish that they would come out and say, because I think there's just going to, I think the division is going to divide even further. I'm going to make a local prediction as well. I still think over here in Western Idaho / Eastern Oregon, we're going to get another little mini temple. All right. Now you can say, Matt.
Wow. What I heard you say, Tiffany, is that Joe Biden is going to win the presidential election. Is that what you were trying to say?
No, I was not saying that at all. I'm just saying both major leading candidates right now have issues, and there are a lot of there's already a lot of division in the church on certain candidates, and I think the brethren have been walking a very fine line, trying to be nice and say, hey, let's play nice with each other and let's not be name calling. And I think that there are a lot of people who wish that they would take a stronger stand. And I think that when they do take a stronger stand, it will probably not be in the direction that those people wishing them to take a stronger stand will find that they like.
Do you think that they would actually say, vote for this person or don't vote for this person? Not that.
No, I don't think they'll take that strong of a stand. But I think maybe on behaviors, they might take a stronger stand. Yeah. And with the implicitness being, we don't like this behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope they read in social media somewhere in the word of wisdom and just say, turns out it's forbidden, folks. Everybody off. I think that would solve it. So that's not my prediction, but it's one strategy they can take.
A hope.
So my prediction is, I guess, Matt, you sort of joked about it, but not that the church is going to return to Mormon, but I think the church will take a few more steps, being more comfortable using the term Mormon. And now, never believe anybody who has an unnamed source, but I have an unnamed source. I talked with the SEO guy, the SEO guy that works for the church and does all, search engine optimization for the church. And he says this is definitely a thing. It seems like when they made the shift, with President Nelson's encouragement to go with the full name of the church, all of us marketers or those with backgrounds in marketing were like, no, this is not good, but now the lawyers are in their ear saying, if we don't at least own it to some degree, we're going to lose trademarks and whatnot. So we got to own it a little bit. And so I think with my unnamed source, you'll see a shift of more use of the word Mormon, which is why we are not changing the name of This Week in Mormons.
Some validation. Yeah.
There it is. Awesome. Now, anybody want to plug something before we sign off? Matt, you always have your podcast plug and things. You want to?
Yeah. The Latter Day Lens. It's a lot of fun. We talk about religion and politics. Yeah, yes. It's a good podcast. Really I enjoy it.
Any other plugs?
We have a plug with Danny, or band Grand Capitals or Grand Capitals, that we haven't talked about much in the podcast. But if you want to listen to some alternative rock music in Spanish and a couple songs in English and a corpus of about 4 or 5 releases, go look it up in Spotify or Apple Music or whatever you get your music. So
there are some video clips, though.
YouTube as well.
So you can. Yes.
Yep. So Gran Capital, that's the name? Okay, yeah. So this is, as the owner of This Week in Mormons, I am asking that you create an intro music that we will hopefully feature at the end of this episode, if that gives you enough time. Yeah. But I would love to, even if it's an existing clip you have,
I was going to say we can launch it along. I was going to say we can launch it along with the new hymn book, but that's probably going to be like
too long, too late.
I like the shorter time frame, so yeah, I like the challenge.
All right. Gran Capital. They will be featured on This Week in Mormons. That would be awesome. Woo-hoo. That would be awesome. And I have one more awesome announcement, but I'll first say that the one thing I'll plug is obviously I spend most of my time with the Leading Saints podcast. And if you're not listening to the Leading Saints podcast, you should, even if you're not a leader. You can find it the same place you find This Week in Mormons, and we'd love to have you engage with content there. And then obviously TWIM is a remarkable podcast that we plan on continuing throughout 2024 with these awesome hosts. And I'm sure Tiffany will introduce some temporary co-hosts that maybe will turn more permanent in the future. Who knows? But please support us through Patreon. This podcast doesn't break even. And I would love to get to a point that these wonderful hosts are actually paid a little something. Maybe I give them a little gift card to the Desert Industries or something. I don't know. We'll figure something out. But we would love to grow our influence there. And, funds are always part of that. So we'll link to it in the show notes, but Patreon, you can become a patron, and there is unique content there that you can access, which is always mentioned at the end of the episode. And I'm also pleased to announce that we have a new sponsor in 2024, and you're going to love this. To me, it just fits the This Week in Mormon brand so perfectly, because growing up, I remember my father waking up on a cold Sunday morning, opening the Deseret News and sipping from a cup of Postum. That's right, folks. Postum
Really? Postum
is sponsoring This Week in Mormons. And all of you hosts are getting your some Postum, and you're going to has anybody not had Postum here?
It is my wife's favorite drink.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
She
what
puts
it
a
is,
little
but I'm
eggnog
looking
in her
forward to it.
Postum.
Postum would be our Echo, Danny. Yes, Postum is like Echo for us.
Yeah,
That's
so
what
it's a coffee alternative,
Yes.
and sort of the Mormon coffee. And
It's like barley?
They have some new, it's a barley drink. They've got the original flavor. They've got the coffee flavor, which I quite like, and then cocoa as well. So I don't know about what it was with turning 40, but the day I turned 40, I just crave something warm and caffeinated in the morning. Now, Postum is not caffeinated, but you can make it.
You can pour Dr. Pepper into it.
A little Diet Coke, Dr. Pepper, whatever.
Something soft, yes.
Yeah, but nothing. I crave something warm in the morning to get my body going. So, that'll be a fun sponsor to help us get to break even, and hopefully we'll grow the Postum empire.
Kurt, I'm going to make it my personal mission in 2024. Maybe I ought to make this my 2024 prediction. You know how I love crazy old school Mormon recipes. I am going to go in search of Postum recipes in Mormon cookbooks. And I'm going to see what I can come up with, and I'm going to cook with the Postum, and we're going to talk about it on the podcast.
That's right.
I'll tell you what my wife
coffee
does.
alternative anymore. So
my wife does Postum with eggnog in it. It's her favorite beverage in the world. Yeah.
There's your first.
Cola de mono, Danny. Cola de mono. Yeah. Yes.
In Spanish,
tail,
it's
that's what we call it in
mono.
Spanish.
Yeah, it's our monkey tail. It's like a beverage that we actually drink this season in Chile. So it's an alcoholic beverage, but then members of the church will do it without the alcohol. But
You do it without
kind of
alcohol,
pretty
Danny?
much
No,
it.
just kidding.
Suddenly turned into a temple recommend interview. All right, Tiffany, do you want to lead us out?
Sure. TWIM Nation, thank you very much for joining us today on this special edition wrap up of the year 2023 in review. We appreciate your continued support. And as always, you can find us on all the social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter, which is now known as X, and you can find us on Instagram. And if you have any questions, comments, or complaints, reach out at contact@thisweekinmormons.com, and they will land in Matt's mailbag, and he will be the one that is responsible for responding to all of those. I have duly assigned him that, whether they're about him or about me or anybody else for that matter. So, TWIM Nation, thanks for a great 2023.